A single mother of two mysteriously disappears one night.
And I just had a foreboding feeling that it was not the best of situations.
She was a government informant working with investigators to bust a drug kingpin.
This case was one of those that just haunted you. It hung like a dark cloud over you.
3 dedicated investigators spent 8 years trying to find her.
Nothing was going right for us.
It was frustrating for investigators when you felt that you had pretty well left no stone unturned.
Could these investigators find the missing informant?
There were always curveballs being thrown at us.
In Maryville, Missouri, a young woman named Christine Elkins doesn't show up for work. Her friends begin to worry. And when police go to her house on the outskirts of town, they suspect something is wrong.
You know, coffee's still in the machine, dishes on the sink, food in the refrigerator. All of her clothing was here. You know, it was obvious that she hadn't packed up and moved.
Clothes still in the hamper, that type of thing.
Christine has been working as a waitress at a cocktail lounge. Most people know her as the devoted mother of 2 young sons.
An everyday woman trying to make ends meet, trying to raise a family.
Mark James is a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And he knows Christine is harboring a deeper secret, leading a double life, and working as an informant for him.
I just did not believe that Christine had left the area, and I just had a foreboding feeling that it was not the best of situations.
After her recent arrest for dealing drugs and anxious to avoid jail, Christine agreed to help the government build a case against her supplier.
A court date had been set, and that court date was coming nearer, so she definitely had some incentive there.
But it was a dangerous gamble, because the man she was dealing with was suspected by federal agents of murder and extortion.
This was not an ordinary small-town crook here, that he obviously had a network supporting him.
Investigators have been trying to prosecute Tony Emery for years. Working from the inside, Christine offered the possibility of finally catching Emery. But now Christine is gone, her car is missing, and police suspect the worst. With no evidence of foul play, she's classified as a missing person.
You say missing because she could very well have just, you know, her car was gone. She could have left.
Rookie ATF agent Mike Schmitz joins the case 1 week after Christine's disappearance.
Her boys were still around. She dropped her boys off, so if in fact she fled, that was a little unusual. So there were a lot of little things that start adding up that you think that she didn't just leave.
You know, call it that cliche, you know, police gut instinct or whatever. I didn't think that was the case.
Schmitz, the rookie, trusts the instincts of his mentor, Mark James.
You know, he was a former state trooper, former narcotics officer who'd done many, many undercover deals. Just a pretty savvy, you know, cop.
Local and state police are brought into the investigation.
You know, suddenly we have troopers in here from the Missouri State Highway Patrol. We have ATF there, and they're talking about Christine being missing.
Strong remembers an incident years earlier when Christine had shown up one night at the police station, bloodied and hysterical, claiming Tony had beaten her up.
While we were waiting for the narcotics team to deal with Christine, she just became irritated and decided to take things into her own hands and picked up the telephone and phoned Tony Emery and started yelling at him on the phone, saying, "I'm not afraid of you, I'm at the police station." And I'm thinking, this is bad. This is a slow-motion train wreck.
But investigators know that if Christine hasn't run away, then only one person could profit from seeing her disappear: Tony Emery.
This guy had really terrorized that part of the state of Missouri for most of his adult life.
Every time they even come close to convicting him, Emery fought back, and fought dirty.
We interviewed accomplices that were with him when he fired shots into the prosecuting attorney's home,
The Emery family ran a successful trash hauling business. A local businessman discovered how difficult competing with Tony could be when he tried to start a rival trucking company.
His building and truck blew up one night, causing damage to several homes nearby.
The town bully, basically.
In high school, he was a bully. People have always been kind of afraid of Tony Emery. Tony Emery found that methamphetamine was a way to actually turn being a bully into making a lot of money.
Methamphetamine, or meth, is a cheap homemade form of speed, as addictive as crack cocaine. But for Tony, it is purely business.
I don't remember anybody ever telling us that Tony Emery used a drug. Like I said, he didn't drink. He didn't seem to smoke. He kept in good shape. If you'd sit and watch him on the street, he was kind of like a hunter. He'd step out, he's surveying what's going on around him.
Federal agents are hoping with Christine's help that they'll be able to put Tony away for good. Just days before her disappearance, James tells Christine to lay low while he prepares his case.
I had instructed her now to just avoid contact, if at all possible, with any of these guys, and give us a couple of days to get our homework done.
But just days later, Christine desperately calls James. She's been summoned to a meeting at Tony's house, and she's scared. James is nervous.
She didn't feel like that she could put that meeting off, that he was quite insistent that he wanted to meet her.
James makes the 2-hour drive to Maryville. The operation is rushed, and he's afraid he can't guarantee Christine's safety.
Christine did not want any kind of surveillance done on her. She felt like there was no way that she could be watched safely.
Nonetheless, wearing a microphone and recorder, Christine goes inside Tony's house while investigators wait and listen in a parking lot nearby.
From this vantage point, down here from his new home, Tony was able to look out, survey the area, and he picked out something that didn't look normal to him. It was a car that was out of place. He recognized it as not belonging in this neighborhood.
Tony brazenly approaches the detectives on surveillance.
And he walked up and crouched down outside our vehicle and just sat there and stared into our vehicle.
Later that night, with the cover of their operation blown, she meets Agent James at a local airport. Their prearranged rendezvous. She is hysterical.
She said that Tony had said that he thought he was under surveillance and that if she was assisting the police, he'd kill her.
Christine doesn't know where to turn. A few days later, she calls Mark James. Tony is offering to give her money and drugs if she'll get out of town. She's frightened and confused.
She, in a very vulnerable moment, admitted that, this is very tempting for me to just take his drugs, take his money, and run. And I said, whatever you do, do not meet with him. I think he's setting you up.
That was the last time Agent James ever spoke to Christine. Now the only lead police have is Christine's chilling remark made to a friend the night she disappeared.
If I'm not back in 10 minutes, you'll find me in the morgue. And he was the last person that saw her alive.
Did she meet with Tony Emery despite police warnings?
A lot of folks were speculating that she had, in fact, just left the area.
But as James leads the investigation, he tells agents to look at the one man who has the most to gain by Christine's disappearance, drug kingpin Tony Emery.
Tony Emery was trying to pay her off and have her leave the area so she wouldn't be available to testify against him in a state case that was pending.
James and the ATF team are beginning to fear the worst.
He felt that she had probably met with an evil end.
The investigators are going to try and smoke out Tony Emery.
You wouldn't go after somebody that was Tony's right-hand man. You're going to go after somebody, you're going to go visit with somebody, okay, that maybe is married to somebody that has dealt with Tony in the past.
Schmitz and Strong begin closing in from the outer edges of Tony's circle, piecing together each scrap of information, cross-checking it with phone records and bank statements.
We went about collecting all available evidence, hundreds of pages of telephone tolls for everybody, every known associate of Tony Emery, reams of bank records of all the bank accounts of Tony Emery and his associates.
They also interview more than 100 people.
And of course, then with each person you go interview, you come up with 2 or 3 names that you didn't have.
And we started putting a lot of pressure on known Emery associates, trying to rattle somebody's cage. But I'll tell you, wasn't anybody coming forward to assist us. I mean, they were clamming up.
With every dead end and false lead, these investigators are losing hope that Christine will be found alive. They are also more certain than ever that Tony Emery is responsible for her disappearance.
The official word is we need some evidence, but there's no body, there's no blood, her car is gone.
Just basically, this woman has disappeared.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike Green is assigned to the case, only to tell Schmitz they don't have one.
I mean, there's a difference, I guess, between information and evidence. I mean, you may have lots of information, but out of that, what the rules of evidence allow you to present in court is going to be almost always will be less than this body of information you have.
And he felt very strongly that we didn't have a very good case. So that caused a lot of friction.
Investigators meet with the U.S. Attorney in a heated exchange at the courthouse.
And you grow more and more frustrated. And there were a couple times where it got pretty emotional, pretty loud in the conference room up at the U.S. Attorney's office.
Frustrated and angry, Schmitz and Strong rely on Mark James to keep them going.
He inspired you to dig, and he kept you going.
4 months into the search, they have nothing. Then they get a call from detectives in Colorado with what may be the first break in the case. A small-time dealer willing to trade information.
He's in some hot water out here, and he claims he has some information about a missing woman that was involved with the Emerys out there, and he says that she's been murdered.
He's called J. Dub, and he sells drugs and information. Though his details are sketchy, J. Dub says he's heard the story from this man, Tony Emery's own cousin, Herb Emery, known on the street as Tug.
We were pretty excited because we knew exactly that this informant's information was right.
We got to wire this guy up as soon as possible and see if, in fact, this guy has been flapping his gums about, this murder.
Investigators set a trap in the parking lot of this Colorado night spot. J. Dub meets Tug Emery to talk about how to kill somebody.
I don't know quite what to do with the body. You have to find somewhere to put it.
What Tug Emery doesn't know is that J. Dub is wearing a wire, and investigators are nearby listening to every word.
J. Dub was able to get Herb Emery to talk about the fact that they had killed this female informant.
You had a piece of pipe about that long? Remember one of them big flashlights? That was you?
Now he says, so I bet she fought, is what J. Dub asked. And of course, Tug says, oh yeah, she fought all right. She wouldn't go down,
That chick Denver whipped her ass, huh? Nah, she didn't fucking whip me, but it's hard to do.
She was hard to do. Tug Emery not only implicates himself, but his cousin Tony with those words, and investigators have it on tape. But if Christine's dead, where's the body?
And talked about how they had put her body in this car and had put a stick on the accelerator and launched this car off of the cliff of this rock quarry.
They're with their helm 100 feet down. And that battle down. It looks like a rocket.
It wasn't that good of a tape, but it was a start, but that was it. It was just a start.
Now, after 4 months of frustration, investigators finally have their first solid lead.
We know we've got Tony Emery, and it's just a matter of a little legwork here, and we'll wrap this thing up. A lot of rock quarries in northwest Missouri.
So we started a systematic check of all these rock quarries.
Through the winter and into summer, they dig and drag more than 100 quarries.
believe in total we probably found about 3 sunken, stolen cars that would really get us excited.
We ended up getting over into Kansas, up into Iowa, up into Nebraska, looking at quarries.
For these investigators, it's become personal.
And when you take out a witness in a case, that sends a message to the community.
What's more, I had personally given my word to Christine Elkins' mother that I would never stop. And I was going to stick with that.
Next, the people around Tony begin to crack. Investigators are racing against time. They've got to build a case and stop Tony Emery for good. Even though with every day that passes, leads in the murder of Christine Elkins become harder to find.
This case was one of those that just haunted you. It hung like a dark cloud over you. We weren't given any breaks at the beginning. Nothing was going right for us. We would follow up leads and they would go nowhere. People wouldn't cooperate with us. It was downright depressing at times to think about what was going on.
They spend days on stakeouts, interviewing witnesses. But the cops know the only way they'll ever nail Tony is to bait a trap for him.
So we come up with a plan. Let's do a dope deal with Tug and his cousin, Tony, and what other associates he wants to use.
Investigators reason that if they can bust Tony and his cohorts on drug charges, eventually they'll get Tony for murder.
Let's say that an individual purchased an ounce of methamphetamine from Tony Emery or whoever, and turns around and sells that ounce.
Even though it's only 1 ounce, under conspiracy statutes, that person faces the same penalty as the ringleader.
Conspiracy statutes carry heavy sentences, and you don't have to be the top dog. If you're involved in a conspiracy, you'll go down like everyone else.
If we could put a murder with that conspiracy, then everybody involved in that could potentially be charged with that murder.
Suddenly, everybody who's ever sold drugs for Tony can be charged with having a role in Christine's murder.
In the business, we call it a hammer hanging over their head, and they don't want that hammer to drop on them.
Well, I don't want to say we're intimidating people, but that's how you get their attention anyway.
They don't want to do the hard time for the murder just because they peddled, several ounces of methamphetamine for Tony.
As federal agents watch and listen, Tony and his gang gather in a Colorado motel room. They walk right into the hands of law enforcement.
Keep your hands up. Lay down over yet. Lay down the bed. Hands out in front of you. Hands out in front of you. Do not move.
Police arrest Tony, his cousin Tug, and a third member of the gang, Ron Coy. But just when it seems Tony and his gang are backed into a corner, the prosecutor in Colorado lets them plead to felony drug charges, unaware that Mike Green in Kansas City is working to bring federal murder charges against them.
That literally wrecked our case for going after a conspiracy case, which we were really working hard for. So that was very devastating to the case.
Nevertheless, Tony, Tug, and Ron Coy get 10 years for drug trafficking.
So what was good about that was that we got them off the street. We got the people off the street that we felt were involved in this homicide.
Investigators know they've still got to bring murder charges against Tony to put him away for good. After numerous interviews with Tony's neighbors, they learn one of Tony's properties was vacant at the time of Christine's disappearance. Schmitz and Strong are ecstatic. They believe they've figured out where the murder took place.
It's going to be this gray home here on the corner.
Once again, solving Christine's disappearance seems to be within reach, and hopes are high. But as they approach what they now believe to be the site of the murder, they soon discover that Tony Emery has outsmarted them once again.
Well, it's all been remodeled. Completely new walls, new carpet, everything's repainted. Can you use luminol? Can we do that in the basement? Can we do that on the stairs? Will it pick up anything? And it was basically no. If it's been painted, it won't help.
So with no forensic evidence at the scene, investigators hit another dead end.
There were always curveballs being thrown at us. Just, you'd think you'd have, hey, we got something going here. We figured out maybe this. Hey, this is going to help us.
The frustration continues for another 4 years.
They still have no body, no forensic evidence. They've got no witnesses.
After 6 years on the case, detectives are so angry they threaten to take the case to another prosecutor.
I said, if you don't think it's here, then just say so. Don't lead us on and drag us on. You know, we'll find somebody else that thinks it's here. There's other U.S. attorneys over here. It was never enough. Wasn't enough. No body.
It was frustrating for investigators when you felt that you had pretty well left no stone unturned, and we were at a point of, you know, we've got to take our best shot here.
Adding to their exasperation is that they have lots of other cases to investigate.
Real police work, you're assigned to that case, and then suddenly you're out, 30 minutes later working on, some old lady's home burglary, and they've taken her microwave.
Strong and Schmitz have been on the case for almost 7 years. In that time, Mark James is promoted and moved to ATF in Omaha.
And he was always emailing me and faxing me and calling me. He'd always have ideas and some guidance.
So when the phone would ring at 11 o'clock at night, I knew who it was, and I would just roll over and pick up the receiver and say, you know, "What's up, Schmitz?" Because I knew it was Mike.
With no new leads, they keep looking through old files and interviews, hoping that something they may have overlooked before may now have some significance. They discover a name mentioned in the 6-year-old undercover tape, a small-time hood named Bobby Miller.
Think Miller ever said anything about that back there? No. I told him I'd kill him. Man, Miller, I don't really trust him.
After investigators review their hundreds of interviews with Emery's associates, they now believe Bobby Miller has vital information, and they have a theory.
When Herb Emery went back to Maryville in early August of 1990 to help Tony Emery murder Christine Elkins, he took Bobby Miller with him.
We'd heard a rumor that Bobby had panicked in the commission of the murder and had fled.
Miller is granted immunity if he tells them everything he knows about Christine's murder. In secret, police drive him around Maryville, hoping to get a roadmap of Christine's last night.
And he was able to point out, this is Tony's house, this is where Tug and I went, this is where we planned the homicide.
The plan was to lure Christine into the house that night, to give her some drugs, give her some money.
Bobby Miller was out by the garage with the truck, with the barrel, with the concrete, with the hose. They were going to do it all real nice and neat.
They were going to put Christine in a 55-gallon steel barrel. They were going to put concrete on top of that. They were going to put water on it. They were going to cap the drum, put her in the back of this truck, and then he was going to haul her off and dispose of the body, most likely in Colorado.
Does that make any sense? As if you were to get stopped by a law enforcement officer, they're going to, you're going to be nervous. They're going to eventually say, "What are you doing? What do you got in the back?" "Oh, it's just a barrel." "Oh, what's in the barrel?" You know what I mean? These guys aren't thinking. It's crazy. It's ludicrous.
Based on Bobby Miller's interviews, Schmitz and Strong now believe that Christine was murdered, that Tony planned it, that it took place at this house. But without a body, they can't even charge him.
Still a case that we had no body, and it's very difficult to prove a murder without a body, and that's what we were basically looking to do.
1997. In the 7 years since Christine Elkins disappeared, Tony Emery and his gang have almost finished their prison term for drug dealing. Investigators Schmitz and Strong don't want Tony back on the street, but time is running out. One member of the gang is already paroled, Ron Coy.
So we thought, we need to go talk to him, because I've been around Maryville long enough to know that if Tony Emery's involved in something, Ron Coy is usually close by.
And he's nervous. He's a nervous guy. He's just as guilty as all get out.
So nervous that Coy clumsily gives up the single most important clue in the 7-year search. He tells agents he's heard Christine's body was probably dumped in the Missouri River.
And we're sitting there thinking, Missouri River, that's the first time we heard of that. We've been looking at rock quarries for years. So, we tell him, we're not buying this.
Coy is scared and wants to get the police off his back, so he sends them to a man named Dana Kleiser. Police already interviewed Kleiser in 1990, but had thought him to be a minor player at best.
A standard interview, a name that had come up, and we were hitting everybody, you know.
Kleiser was eliminated in the first weeks of the investigation. But now Schmitz and Strong are driving out to Dana Kleiser's, tracking down yet another lead that at first seems like a dead end.
He has nothing to tell them, nothing at all about this case. He bought a car from Tony once. He doesn't, nothing is leading anywhere. And so they're getting ready to leave, and they're kind of annoyed that they've wasted the evening. And as Schmitz is standing, Kleiser says, "You know about that Tony, kind of a funny story."
Kleiser begins telling them about a hot summer night back in 1990. He and his wife were just about to go to sleep.
And he sees somebody coming down the farm road. There's two vehicles. He's thinking, well, who is that? What is that?
It's Tony Emery driving a maroon-colored Oldsmobile, followed by Ron Coy in his pickup. Tony gets out of the car.
He says, "I just need a little gas from you." He says, "That's fine." He says, "You might want to let the hose out and drip all the water out of it." Tony's comment was,
This car isn't going very far. So Tony starts putting some gallons in the car, and he said, "You know, that time you took me boating into Missouri River, I want to go there. Can you take me to that spot?" And Dana reluctantly says, "Yeah, I can take you there." And he said, "You know, what I want you to do is I want you to stay on the back roads, stay off the 71 highway. Don't speed, don't draw any attention to yourself. Follow us down there." And he said, "When you get close, pull off."
Dana Kleiser leads the way as Tony Emery drives the mysterious second car, and Ron Coy follows in his pickup to a remote boat ramp here on the Missouri River.
Tony stops and gets out and says, "Hey, you just wait here, we'll be right back."
Under cover of darkness, Tony and Ron let the maroon Oldsmobile slide down the boat ramp into the muddy waters of the Missouri River.
15, 20 minutes pass, and back comes one vehicle. It's now Ron Coy in his pickup truck and Tony Emery in with him. The car is gone.
Schmitz and Strong can't believe what they've just heard, that the endless searches through rock quarries were all a blind alley, and in fact, Christine's car may be sitting at the bottom of the Missouri River. He immediately calls Mark James to fill him in.
I said, "You're going to believe this, Mark, but, you know, this knucklehead is saying that it's in the Missouri River."
But where to look? The Missouri River is almost 2,400 miles long, winding through 7 states before meeting up with the Mississippi, and eventually emptying into the Gulf of Mexico.
It's the mighty Mo, you know, and the current's running, you know, we come to find out the current's running about 8-9 miles an hour. And you're thinking, we're in trouble.
Once again, the investigators' excitement quickly turns to despair as they realize the enormity of the task in front of them.
And where do you start? Well, you start with people that know the river. And the people around here that know the river are the Corps of Engineers. You bring in the Missouri Water Patrol, people that are on the rivers and on the lakes and deal with water on a daily basis.
And my first thoughts are, you know, we'll never find Christine. You know, we're never going to be able to help her family put closure on this. But we got down there, we're going to give it one last shot.
It may be their last chance, and to make matters worse, 4 years ago, the river erupted in a devastating flood.
Oh, it could be in the Gulf of Mexico. One of the experts threw that out, you know. And the others are saying you'd be surprised. You know, it may have gone down, and maybe with the flood, it may have lifted it again and sent it somewhere, but not too far.
But the agents know they need specific help. In calling every government agency he can think of for assistance, Schmitz eventually hears about a nonprofit group in Denver called NecroSearch. They specialize in finding the remains of people who've been missing for years.
You know, you got plant experts, bug experts, dirt experts, you name it, they've got it. Tree experts, they've got these experts, and there's just other ways of finding clandestine graves.
Clark Davenport is a geophysicist and one of the group's founders.
We love the challenge of thinking outside a box. The common denominator on the cases that we've been successful in is that the law enforcement agency that has the case, they have done their homework.
Davenport raises questions neither Schmitz nor anyone had thought about.
He said it was the Missouri River, and I said, well, what were the sedimentation rates?
What was the weather like that night? Do you know what was the moon out that night? Was it full moon?
The big question was float times of vehicles.
The most unusual questions he asks are about the car.
How much metal was in this vehicle? Had I been in contact with General Motors?
And actually, believe it or not, the Michigan Department of State Police and the Coast Guard had done a joint study on floatability times with General Motors of cars.
Armed with that information, Davenport begins narrowing the search area.
He doesn't claim to find anything. He says, what we can do, though, is we can tell you where to look. We're good at that.
The case is 7 years old, and searching the Missouri River will cost precious time and money. How will Schmitz explain this to his supervisor?
We're looking at $20,000 to $30,000 to pull this thing out, And and the SAC, the special agent in charge, was really concerned about that. And I said, Bob, relax. We're not going to find it. It's a needle in a haystack. There's no way.
Next, agents get their last chance to search for Christine. It's been 7 years since Christine Elkins disappeared. Still, investigators don't have the critical evidence to prove that she was murdered. Her body. Saturday, July 28, 1997. A small army gathers on the banks of the Missouri River to search for Christine's car.
There was a real sense that they were at the end of this investigation. The U.S. attorney in the area was not saying kill this investigation by any means, but there was pressure. Make a case. Make a case.
A team from NecroSearch spends a day on the river mapping points for the divers to search.
So we towed a magnetometer behind a boat, looking for magnetic, if you wish, anomalies or targets in the river bottom.
And it, of course, was the hottest weekend on record, probably. I mean, it had to push 100.
But Davenport and his crew successfully narrow the search.
We knew this happened on an August evening. Suspicion that they had is that the car might have been driven into the river, but not driven by an individual, but forced into the river, maybe having the accelerator jammed or something like that. In order to do that, the windows most likely were down.
It was suffocatingly hot the night Christine disappeared. Another reason Davenport believes the windows were down.
Well, a car is going to sink a lot faster if the windows are down. I don't care how fast the river is. And that's why we, with the weight of the car, the current on that time, and the weather factors, that's why we figured we didn't have to go more than a half a mile downstream.
We'd go out about 300 yards, 400 yards, and then they'd come back and just kept going back and forth, back and forth. Their equipment is spitting out graphs and that sort of thing.
They put together a map with the most promising spots and then begin their painstaking search. There is the Coast Guard, Army Corps of Engineers, State Water Patrol, professional divers, local police and ATF agents, all searching for Christine Elkins' car. Schmitz and Strong are feeling the pressure.
Because of the money involved, this may have been the last big chance to look for her.
And the idea was for the Coast Guard to drop a buoy with a huge 300-pound concrete block, that it'll just go straight down into that vicinity.
Will this finally be the day they find Christine, or just another dead end? The current is so strong and unrelenting that divers must inch their way down using the buoy's cable or risk being swept away.
I just watched as the divers tried to go down the cable of this buoy, and the current is so strong it's pulling their face mask off, it's taking their flippers off.
They go down two, and then when those two get tired or whatever, they come up and they send two other guys down. These guys had radio communication between each other and the people on the boat. They were feeling all kinds of vehicles down there. They would come up with a vehicle and start describing it and figure out that it was 4 doors or whatever, and that's not it. This is a 2-door.
After 7 years of investigating and facing the possibility that the end of the search is near, Schmitz and Strong anxiously await the result.
Mike and I probably leaned on each other a few times and said, oh my gosh, are we going to be able to get through this?
It's a stifling July day, but the moment the investigators have been waiting almost a decade for is about to arrive.
He said, Mike, I've got some trim here. I've got a car. It's a two-door. And I said, is there any, because Cutlass has the word Cutlass, on the back panel there by the back window or whatever.
They know that Christine was driving her Cutlass the night she went to meet Tony.
And I said, is there any wording? Can you feel anything? If you can pull off trim, you can pull off anything, Dennis, pull it off. I said, can you get to the back? Can you get to the plate? And he said, yeah, I think I can. Can you feel the numbers? Can you feel the numbers on the plate? Read me the plate. Can you, tell me what you think it is? The next word I hear is, he says, I just ripped it off, I'm coming up. You can see he's struggling with taking his mask off. He's got this plate and this piece of trim in the same hand or whatever. So eventually, we get over close enough to him, and he gets his mask off, and no one has seen the plate yet.
Current's twisting him around, and he's moving. He spins that plate around, and Mike Smith starts yelling.
We got it! We got it! Got it! Yes!
And I see that plate, and I obviously know the number. It's Boy 6E652,
And he's jumping up and down the boat, and I'm thinking he's going to capsize all these guys.
I tell you, I have chills right now just telling that, because that was huge. That wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't think that ever happened.
But the car is so deep in sediment, it's practically welded to the river bottom. Now, the difficulty becomes actually bringing it to the surface.
We start discussing, wait a minute, if we start moving this thing, the trunk pops open or the car falls apart and our evidence disappears, we're in trouble. Let's make sure we go down there. So we end up tying the trunk down. We use straps.
It takes nearly 4 grueling hours for the divers to gently attach tow ropes to inch the car out of the mud. This is painstaking work, since the car represents the culmination of a 7-year investigation.
You can see the stick in there for the gas pedal. You can see a stick that was jammed in there to keep the steering wheel straight. The key was on. The thing was covered in like bugs, like a sand bug or some sort of a bug that was moving. Like the whole thing was like alive.
Crime scene specialists will go over the car in Maryville. Till then, it is carefully loaded onto a flatbed and wrapped to protect it. Not only is the car the linchpin in the case against Tony Emery, investigators are fairly certain it is also Christine Elkins' tomb.
Keep in mind, this car had been underwater a week away from 7 years.
The evidence guys started their work, piece by piece. They went and got little plastic gardening shovels and started just piecemealing it all out. And they did that all night long.
Wrapped in the trunk in a rubber mat, remarkably preserved if muddy, is a human skeleton. But to finally convict Tony Emery, they will have to prove the skeleton is Christine Elkins. An anthropology professor at Kansas State University is called in to analyze the contents of the trunk.
Essentially a complete Caucasoid female skeleton.
But there is a peculiar characteristic of this skeleton.
Both upper arms were the same length, and that's odd. The lower arms were the same length, and that's odd. I've never seen that before. If you're right-handed, your right arm will be slightly longer, a little better developed. And so I'm thinking, now what happens where you use both hands equally and you're pressing the shoulders down?
Because of their exhaustive research into Christine's life, investigators already know that she grew up on a dairy farm in Iowa.
And well, all right, that's consistent with what I'm seeing in the skeleton. And so we said, maybe this fits somebody who was a milkmaid for years and years and years.
After a forensic odontologist examines dental x-rays, it is confirmed police have finally found Christine Elkins. They know the tape made in the Colorado parking lot, plus the recovery of the car is enough to bring an indictment against Herb Emery. But can they convince him to cooperate in building a case against his cousin Tony?
So Mike and Randy Strong and I went out there and encountered her. I said, you notice that yours is the only name on that indictment. You're the only person charged with the murder of Christine Elkins.
He didn't say, I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? I didn't have anything to do with that. It was, well, I'm not going down on that alone.
Herb finally agrees to testify against his cousin.
And we felt that with now Herb Emery agreeing to testify, that it was now sufficient to bring a murder charge against Tony Emery.
But can they prove it in front of a jury? July 7th, 1998. Tony Emery goes on trial in federal court, 7 years after the murder of Christine Elkins.
The only reason we can bring the case in federal court is because she's a federal informant and because he killed her as a result of that. Now, we did have to prove that his motive in killing her was just to stop her cooperation with law enforcement in general, and that in the specific case, our case, killing her prevented her cooperating with federal authorities. That's what we had to prove.
Tony Emery may have made a fatal mistake the night he snuck up on Agent James and the undercover officer in the parking lot.
In fact, that showed there that he knew there were other people looking at him.
It is proof that Tony knew he was under investigation. Green argues it was then that Tony decided to get rid of Christine Elkins.
It was only 9 days after that incident where he killed her. He lured her over and killed her.
Now everything comes down to 6 days and the testimony of 20 witnesses in a courtroom in Kansas City. The jury takes only 2 hours to reach a decision.
And they come in and gave that guilty verdict, and how do you top that?
Tony Emery is convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole.
He looked scared. At the end, he looked scared. It had taken a long time. Life in prison is a serious sentence, and he knew it. He knew he'd lost.
3 dedicated investigators spent 8 years tracking down the killer of Christine Elkins. Finally, they're able to close the case.
Obviously, there was a lot of teamwork there, and there was a lot of luck there. We put a lot of time into this, and the U.S. attorneys did Mike Green and Matt Whitworth did a fantastic job of preparing for the trial, and that showed in the fact that they came back, wow, it was less than 2 hours with a guilty verdict.
Given the fact that actually, as we indicted the case, he was nearing the end of his federal sentence out of Colorado. He was going to be returning to the community within a year or so. He would have been right back up there in Maryville, and I'm sure would have gone back into criminal activity. He's a dangerous, violent man.
I don't think there's a lot of 10-year-old homicides like that get solved. I never entertained the thought that we were going to lose this case. I just had faith that the good guys were going to win this one.